At a family dinner, I shared my early retirement news. My niece, Serena, burst out laughing, calling me unemployed and useless, mocking my humble home. She even predicted I'd burden them in a nursing home. Then, I pulled out my phone and watched their faces drain of color when I revealed my $3.2 million net worth. This is my story. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The aroma of my famous roast chicken usually filled my modest kitchen with warmth and anticipation, but that evening, it felt heavy, almost suffocating. We were gathered for one of our infrequent family dinners, a tradition I'd tried to uphold despite the growing distance and coldness from some of my relatives. My brother, Arthur, sat across from me, his gaze mostly fixed on his plate. His wife, Clara, picked delicately at her food, while their son, Leo, quietly observed everyone. And then there was Serena, Arthur's daughter, whose presence always managed to inject a peculiar tension into any room. I took a deep breath, deciding this was the moment to share some significant news. My voice was a little softer than usual as I began. I have something to tell you all. The company decided to put me on permanent medical leave. My back surgery. You know, it means, well, it means early retirement. I paused, looking around the table, searching for understanding, perhaps a word of concern. This wasn't a choice I'd made lightly. After 4 decades of dedicated work, being forced out, even with a decent package, was unsettling. It felt like the end of an era, a chapter closing with a quiet thud. The silence that followed was broken not by a sympathetic murmur, but by a sudden, jarring sound. Serena, my niece, burst out laughing. It wasn't a gentle chuckle or a polite titter. It was a loud, uninhibited guffaw that grated on my nerves. Her eyes, usually sharp and critical, now gleamed with what looked like cruel amusement. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor," she gasped between fits of laughter, wiping a tear from her eye. Unemployed and useless, just like I always predicted. My heart sank. I knew Serena had never held me in high regard, but to be so openly dismissive, so brutally cruel, especially now, when I was feeling vulnerable. She leaned forward, her smirk widening. "So, how does it feel, Auntie? To finally end up living in the dump you call a home, with nothing to do all day?" Her gaze swept around my small, but meticulously kept, apartment, lingering on the worn upholstery and the slightly faded curtains. To her, it was a dump. To me, it was home, filled with memories, and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. I glanced at Arthur, hoping for some intervention, some sign of brotherly support. But Arthur simply stared at his plate, meticulously cutting a piece of chicken into impossibly small squares, pretending not to hear his daughter's barbed words. Clara, usually quick to smooth over family awkwardness, looked utterly mortified, her eyes darting between Serena and me, her face a pale shade of discomfort. Leo, bless his heart, shifted in his seat, his youthful face etched with visible unease, clearly wanting to speak but holding back. I tried to regain my composure, to explain the nuances of my situation. "It's for my back, Serena," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "The doctors said the surgery is crucial, and the recovery will be long. The company offered a severance package, so it's not entirely." But Serena cut me off with another peal of laughter, even louder this time. "Back surgery? Oh, please. That's just an excuse, isn't it? Next thing we know, you'll be calling us up, complaining about not having enough to cover your medical bills. You'll end up in some run-down nursing home, Aunt Eleanor, a financial burden on all of us." Her words were like daggers, each one designed to inflict maximum pain. She made it sound like my existence was a pending catastrophe, an impending drain on their imagined resources. A cold, hard crack formed inside me then, a fissure in the foundation of my patience and my tolerance. My chest tightened, but a strange sense of resolve began to bloom in its place. I took another deep breath, letting the anger settle, transforming it into something else entirely. Calmness. Absolute, unshakable calm. "I assure you, Serena," I said, my voice low and even. "I won't be a burden to anyone. Not now. Not ever. Serena scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, really? What are you going to do? Win the lottery? Without a word, I reached into my purse, pulling out my phone. My fingers moved swiftly, unlocking the screen, navigating to an app. I held it up, turning the screen slightly so Serena could see. Her brow furrowed in confusion, then surprise. Then, I met her gaze directly, my own eyes holding a steady, unyielding light. I have a net worth of $3 million. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Serena's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face so rapidly it was almost comical, leaving her looking utterly pale and speechless. Across the table, Arthur, who had been so engrossed in his chicken, let out a startled gasp as his fork clattered against his plate, echoing loudly in the sudden, profound silence. Clara and Leo stared, eyes wide with astonishment. I allowed the shock to sink in for a moment, enjoying the sudden, profound shift in the atmosphere. Then, I decided to be precise. $3.2 million, to be exact. Serena found her voice, though it was little more than a disbelieving whisper. 3.2 million? How? How could a janitor, with a tiny apartment and an old Honda, have that kind of money? Her voice was laced with a desperate need for an explanation, for a way to reconcile her skewed perception of me with this stunning reality. My life as a janitor, a profession she considered beneath contempt, was now being forcefully re-evaluated in her mind. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. 40 years, Serena. 40 years of diligent work, living well within my means, and making smart choices. 40 years of patience and consistent investing. Compound interest, my dear, is a powerful thing. While some were buying expensive cars and designer clothes, I was buying assets. While others were taking lavish vacations, I was contributing to my retirement accounts. It's not about how much you earn, it's about how much you save, and how wisely you invest it. Serena's face, which had been frozen in cruel amusement moments before, now crumbled into a mixture of panic and dawning comprehension. Her entire outlook, the dismissive, scornful way she had always viewed me, shattered into a million pieces. The realization of her profound misjudgment, the sheer depth of her ignorance about my life, was palpable. Her eyes darted around the table, avoiding mine, a clear sign that her comfortable narrative of her poor, useless aunt had just been irrevocably destroyed. The snide remarks, the predictions of my destitution, now sounded utterly ridiculous. Hollow echoes in the sudden silence. I turned my gaze to Arthur, who was still staring at the dropped fork, as if it held the answer to the universe's greatest mysteries. His face was a mask of confusion, perhaps even a flicker of regret. Arthur, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. Would knowing this have changed how you treated me all these years? Arthur's silence, after my question, was louder than any of Serena's taunts. He just stared at his plate, his face unreadable, confirming what I already knew. His passivity wasn't new. It was a well-worn path, a silent accomplice to Serena's overt disrespect that had chipped away at me for years. Looking at him now, I saw not just my brother, but a shadow of the man he once was. A man I'd loved and confided in, now lost somewhere beneath layers of indifference and, I suspected, his daughter's subtle manipulation. My mind drifted back 8 years, to the first time I met Serena. Arthur, beaming with pride, had brought her to my modest apartment for dinner. She was then his new wife. I remembered the way she entered, a vision of polished wealth. Her designer dress seemed to shimmer in my humble living room, and her expensive perfume, while pleasant, felt a little too potent for my small space. Her eyes, as they swept across my meticulously clean but undeniably simple furnishings, held a barely concealed disdain. She smiled, of course, a practiced, polite curve of her lips that didn't quite reach her eyes, but her gaze lingered a fraction too long on the slightly worn armchair, on the hand-knitted throw my mother had made, on the mismatched dishes I'd inherited and treasured. It was clear my world was a universe away from hers, and not in a way she found charming. So, Eleanor, she had said, her voice smooth and perfectly modulated. "Arthur tells me you work at the high school. What exactly do you do there?" The question itself was innocent enough, but the emphasis, the slight pause before "exactly," made it feel pointed, like a thinly veiled inquiry into my social standing. I explained, as I always did, that I was a custodian, responsible for keeping the school clean and safe for the children. I spoke with pride about my work. It was honest, essential labor, and I took it seriously. Serena nodded slowly, her perfectly arched eyebrows rising ever so slightly. "Ah, a custodian. That must be so fulfilling, being so practical." It was a backhanded compliment, delivered with the precision of a master surgeon. The word practical hung in the air, weighted with the unspoken implication of unambitious or unremarkable. I remember feeling a dull ache in my chest, a familiar sensation whenever my life choices were subtly undermined. Arthur, sitting beside her, squirmed in his seat. I could see the embarrassment etched on his face, a blush creeping up his neck. He seemed mortified by my humble apartment, by my practical career, even by the simple, mismatched dishes I proudly served our meal on. He was never one for pretense, but Serena's influence was already beginning to shape his perceptions, making him see his own sister through her critical, class-conscious eyes. Later, I offered Serena a slice of my famous homemade apple pie, a recipe passed down through generations, always a hit. She waved a dismissive hand, a faint, polite smile on her face. "Oh, no thank you, Eleanor. I'm watching my figure, you know, all that sugar." It wasn't just a rejection of my pie. It felt like a rejection of my efforts, my traditions, my way of showing love. She took a tiny sip of her black coffee, making sure everyone saw her commitment to her diet, her superior self-discipline. That evening was a harbinger of things to come. The subtle rejections, the quiet exclusions, started slowly after Arthur and Serena married. For years, holiday dinners had always been at my place, a bustling, warm affair. Suddenly, they began to shift to their grander, more elegant home. "It's just easier, Eleanor," Arthur would say, his voice lacking conviction. "Serena has more space." And with the change of venue came a change in dynamic. I found myself gradually excluded from family photos, relegated to the periphery, or conveniently out of frame. Conversations would ebb and flow around me, but rarely include me, as if my contributions were too mundane, too insignificant for their sophisticated lives. Arthur's visits became less frequent, morphing from cherished family time into hurried obligations. His phone calls grew shorter, punctuated by silences, and always ended with a vague promise to catch up soon that rarely materialized. I mourned the change in him. The Arthur I knew, my kind, thoughtful brother, who used to share his worries and dreams with me over a cup of tea, was slowly fading away, replaced by a distant, almost formal acquaintance. It felt like watching a slow motion unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. Serena, with her innocent smiles and sharp tongue, systematically chipped away at the bond Arthur and I shared. She never directly forbade him from seeing me, but she always managed to center herself, to create a subtle wedge. A family trip would unexpectedly arise on the weekend Arthur was supposed to visit. A last-minute engagement would prevent him from calling. It was a slow, insidious process, always framed by her impeccable manners and concern for Arthur's well-being. The exclusions became more open, more hurtful. I remember Clara's 5th birthday party. I had spent hours searching for the perfect gift, finally settling on a beautiful, limited-edition porcelain doll, meticulously dressed in a delicate lace gown. It cost me a significant amount, over $100. But I wanted to give Clara something truly special, something she would cherish. When she unwrapped it, her eyes lit up with pure joy. But Serena, standing beside her, looked at the doll with a raised eyebrow. "Where did you find this? It looks quite vintage, like something you'd pick up from a thrift store, perhaps." The insinuation was clear. My gift, though expensive and carefully chosen, was cheapened by her words, tainted by her assumption of my financial limitations. Arthur, standing right there, just shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He said nothing. He did nothing. He just let his daughter's cruel words hang in the air, stinging me. That quiet inaction hurt more than any of Serena's direct insults. It was a betrayal by omission, a profound silence that spoke volumes. As the years passed, the exclusions grew more obvious, more blatant. I was uninvited to family vacations, despite always having been included in the past. School events for Clara and Leo, which I would have loved to attend, passed without a word to me. Birthday parties, once a given, were now events I learned about through social media, long after they had happened. Each instance was a fresh cut, a stark reminder of my diminishing place in their lives. Whenever I cautiously broached the subject with Arthur, or even Serena, she would always respond with that same innocent smile. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor, I'm so terribly sorry. It must have slipped my mind," she would coo, her eyes wide with feigned regret. "There's just so much going on. You know how it is." Yet, her own family, her parents and siblings, were always present at every single gathering, never forgotten. It was a cold, calculated performance, designed to make me feel small, forgotten, and ultimately, alone. The years of subtle snubs and pointed exclusions had carved a hollow in my heart. But it was Arthur's birthday dinner 2 years prior that truly became the final straw. I remember the day vividly. I was at the grocery store, pushing my cart down the produce aisle, when my granddaughter, Clara, called. Her voice, usually so bright, was a little hushed, conspiratorial. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you coming to Daddy's surprise party tonight?" Mommy said not to tell him. My blood ran cold. Surprise party? Tonight? I hadn't received an invitation, not a call, not even a casual mention. My hands trembled as I gripped the shopping cart handle. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. They had consciously, undeniably, excluded me from my own son's milestone birthday celebration. Clara, innocent in her revelation, had unwittingly exposed the full extent of their cruelty. My heart shattered. I left the grocery store without buying anything. The carefully chosen watch I had already purchased for Arthur, tucked away in its velvet box at home, now felt like a cruel joke. I had picked it out weeks ago, a classic design, engraved with a small, personal message. I had imagined his smile, his warm embrace. Instead, I spent the evening alone in my quiet apartment, the silence amplifying the echo of my heartbreak. I didn't attend the party. How could I? To show up uninvited would have been an act of desperation, a humiliation I couldn't bear. The next day, Arthur called. My heart, still raw from the previous night, fluttered with a desperate hope for an apology, an explanation. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice cheerful, oblivious. "Just wanted to say thanks for the birthday wishes. I hadn't sent any. We had a nice dinner with Serena's family last night, nothing too fancy, just some casual plans. How are you?" There was no mention of a surprise party, no apology for my omission, no acknowledgement of the gaping hole in my son's family celebration where I should have been. It was as if I never existed. It was then, in that moment, that I truly understood. I was losing my son. Or perhaps, I had already lost him. That conversation was a turning point. The constant pain of hoping, only to be repeatedly disappointed, had become unbearable. For my own self-preservation, I began to build emotional walls. Stone by stone, I fortified my heart against the hurt. I stopped hoping for invitations that never came, for phone calls that grew increasingly scarce. I focused instead on my work, finding solace in the rhythm of my duties at the high school. I delved deeper into my investment strategies, learning more, planning more. I nurtured the friendships I had cultivated at the senior center, finding genuine warmth and camaraderie among those who truly valued my company. I made a conscious decision to let Arthur and Serena live their perfect life without the embarrassment of his janitor mother. If my humble existence was a stain on their polished image, then I would remove myself from their canvas. It was a painful decision, a silent retreat, but it was necessary for my own emotional survival. I would no longer be a source of discomfort or a target for their subtle jabs. I would simply fade into the background of their lives, a quiet presence they could conveniently forget. Despite the pain, Despite the walls I had built, I never stopped loving Arthur. The maternal bond, forged in a lifetime of shared memories and unconditional love, was too strong to break entirely. Deep down, I always held a flicker of hope that one day he would remember the real me, the mother who had always been there for him, long before Serena entered his life. I hoped he would see beyond my simple job and modest home to the woman who had sacrificed and loved him fiercely. And then came that evening, the dinner where I revealed my net worth. $3.2 million. As I watched Serena's face drain of color and Arthur's fork clatter to the floor, it became abundantly clear that they never really knew me at all. They had seen a poor, simple woman, a janitor with an old Honda and a small apartment, someone to be pitied or, worse, scorned. They had judged me by my outward circumstances, by the superficial markers of wealth and status that they held so dear. All the while, beneath their gaze, I had been quietly building a fortune. Not just in money, but in resilience, in patience, and in a quiet, unwavering self-belief. As I drove home that night, the familiar streets illuminated by the pale glow of streetlights, I found myself wondering, could $3 million tear down those walls I had so painstakingly built? Could it mend the cracks that had formed in my relationship with Arthur? Or was the damage too deep, the emotional scars too profound, to be erased by mere financial figures? The sting of their past disrespect still lingered, a phantom ache in my chest. The revelation had certainly shifted something, a tectonic plate beneath the surface of our family dynamics. I was about to find out, very soon, how this newfound power, this shocking revelation of my true financial standing, would irrevocably alter everything. The game, it seemed, had just begun. The silence stretched for 2 full days after the revelation. No calls, no texts, just the quiet hum of my own life. Then, precisely at 7 a.m. on the 3rd morning, my phone rang. Arthur. The early hour was unusual, and the caller ID confirmed my suspicion. The silence was over. I watched the screen glow. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I picked it up, a small, satisfying smirk playing on my lips. It was a minuscule power play, perhaps, but after years of feeling invisible, it felt incredibly gratifying. Mom? Arthur's voice was strained, a tight rope stretched taut. Did I wake you? No, Arthur. I'm an early riser, you know that. My tone was neutral, betraying none of the anticipation I felt. He cleared his throat. Look, Mom. About the other night. The money thing. We need to talk. His voice was laced with an unfamiliar urgency, a stark contrast to his usual casual indifference. He stumbled over the words, searching for the right way to approach this new, unexpected topic. Where? Where did it all come from? And how long? How long have you had it? I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth against my lips, allowing a moment of silence to hang between us. Why does it matter, Arthur? I asked, my voice calm, almost detached. 5 days ago, you didn't care about my financial situation at all. You never once asked about my salary, or if I had enough to get by, or if I needed any help. My words were not accusatory, merely stating a simple, undeniable truth. It was a truth that resonated with years of neglect, years of feeling overlooked. He sighed heavily on the other end of the line. Mom, that's not fair. Of course, I care about you. His words rang hollow, stripped of conviction by the past. Look, Serena. She was out of line the other night. She feels terrible about it. I raised an eyebrow, though he couldn't see it. Does she? Now? I mused, a cynical edge to my voice. Does she feel terrible for her cruel behavior, or for misjudging the situation and realizing she was wrong about me? The distinction was important, crucial even. I suspected it was the latter. Her concern, if it existed, was likely rooted in the implications of my wealth, not in any genuine regret for her past actions. Arthur sidestepped the question. Anyway, she made some of her special scones this morning. They're really good. We could talk properly. The invitation was rare, a complete reversal from the years of exclusion. Serena's special scones suddenly held an irresistible allure, not for their taste, but for what they represented. A desperate attempt to bridge a chasm they had created. I paused, considering. "All right, Arthur," I finally said. "I'll be over in an hour." Hanging up the phone, I reflected that nothing about me had truly changed. I was still Eleanor, the woman who had worked hard, lived simply, and invested wisely. What had changed was their perception of me, and with it, their entire approach. The reveal of my net worth had transformed me, in their eyes, from a useless janitor into someone important, someone worth inviting for coffee and scones. I chose my outfit carefully, not to impress, but to underscore my authenticity. My usual comfortable slacks, a soft, well-worn sweater, and my sensible shoes. No new clothes, no sudden displays of wealth. I would present myself exactly as I always had been, refusing to play their game of outward appearances. I arrived at their sprawling house, the same house where I had once felt so out of place. This time, however, there was a difference. Serena opened the door, and the fake smile she offered me was so exaggerated, so painstakingly constructed, it almost hurt to look at. Her eyes, usually so sharp with judgment, now held a glint of something akin to deference, perhaps even fear. "Eleanor, how absolutely wonderful to see you," she gushed, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that made my teeth ache. She even reached out to touch my arm, a gesture she would never have considered before. I nodded politely, stepping into their grand foyer. The perfectly appointed living room, usually a fortress of polished surfaces and designer furniture, seemed to hum with a new energy. There was an air of suppressed anxiety, a subtle shift in the way they moved, the way they looked at me. It was clear that I was now being treated not as the embarrassment or the charity case, but as someone important, someone whose presence commanded attention. Before I could even settle into the plush armchair, Serena, ever the aggressor, launched directly into it, bypassing any pretense of an apology for her past behavior. "Eleanor, Arthur has been telling me all about it. You have quite the financial portfolio. It's absolutely astonishing." Her words tumbled out, eager and breathless, devoid of any genuine remorse for the hurtful things she had said just days before. There was no mention of her cruel laughter, no regret for her predictions of my destitution. Only a fervent desire to understand, to quantify, to categorize this new, formidable version of Aunt Eleanor. The scones sat on a silver platter on the coffee table, an offering in this new, unspoken negotiation. If you're finding this story as gripping as I hope, please do me a favor. Keep watching to see what happens next. And don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any part of my journey. Your support truly means the world to me. "Quite the financial portfolio," Serena repeated, her voice still laced with an unsettling sweetness. "It's truly incredible, Eleanor. I mean, Arthur said $3 million. That's just... wow." I took another sip of my coffee, setting the cup down carefully. "I do okay," I replied simply, my gaze steady. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me preen, nor would I offer a detailed explanation. My financial life was not a performance for her benefit. Arthur, meanwhile, seemed to have finally found his voice, shaking off the lingering stupor from the dinner revelation. He leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and genuine awe. "Mom, that's more than okay. $3 million. That's incredible. All this time? And we had no idea. How did you even manage all that?" His tone was filled with a newfound respect, a curious admiration that was entirely absent just days before. Serena, ever the opportunist, quickly picked up on Arthur's line of questioning, her probing more pointed, more calculated. "Are you working with a financial advisor, Eleanor? Someone reputable, perhaps? It must be a lot to manage on your own." The implication was clear. A janitor, a simple woman like me, surely couldn't manage such a vast sum independently. I needed guidance, professional help, someone to steer my modest brain away from ruin. A wry smile touched my lips. "A financial advisor?" "Oh, no, Serena. I learned mostly by reading. Books, articles, the internet. I paused for effect. And common sense, of course. Something that seems to be in short supply these days. The sarcasm was subtle, a fine thread woven into my otherwise calm demeanor. But it was there, sharp and clear. Serena's perfect smile wavered for a fraction of a second before she regained her composure. She persisted, her condescension barely concealed. But still, Eleanor, I mean, janitors don't usually become millionaires, do they? It's just not common. The word janitor rolled off her tongue with a subtle dismissiveness, a clear attempt to put me back in the box she had always assigned me. I met her eyes, my gaze unwavering. You'd be surprised, Serena, what janitors can do, and what they can achieve when others underestimate them. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 4 decades of silent struggle and hard-won triumph. Arthur shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the growing tension, perhaps even a glimmer of the truth in my words. He tried to interject. Now, Serena. That's not, but I cut him off, a gentle hand raised. That certain professions, certain people, are incapable of achieving financial success. It's a common misconception among those who judge a book by its cover. My words hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation, undeniable and accurate. Serena's perfect smile finally cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine discomfort, perhaps even a flash of anger. Well, I certainly didn't mean to be insensitive, Eleanor. I merely meant that it's an impressive feat. Her apology was weak, devoid of sincerity, clearly an attempt to backtrack without admitting true fault. She wasn't sorry for her past cruelty. She was sorry for her misjudgment of my worth. Insensitive, indeed, I mused. But let's be clear, Serena. What exactly is your definition of successful? Is it only measured in designer clothes and lavish homes? Because I consider myself quite successful. 40 years of honest work, raising a wonderful son, being a loving grandmother, and yes, quietly building a substantial nest egg. I'd say that's a pretty good measure of success, wouldn't you? The unspoken subtext of the visit hung heavy in the air. This was not a genuine attempt at reconciliation or understanding. This was a calculated move, prompted solely by the revelation of my wealth. They weren't interested in me, Eleanor, the person. They were interested in Eleanor, the millionaire. Sensing the conversation was going nowhere productive, and feeling a familiar weariness settle over me, I stood up. Well, it's been illuminating, I said, putting my empty coffee cup on the table. But I have other plans for the day. Arthur jumped up immediately, his sudden eagerness almost comical. Oh, Mom, don't leave yet. We just started talking. What are your retirement plans now? Are you going to travel, see the world, perhaps move into a bigger place? You deserve it. His questions tumbled out, each one betraying his calculative curiosity, his sudden desire to connect my newfound wealth with his own unspoken aspirations. I offered non-committal answers, a gentle smile on my face. I'm still thinking about it, Arthur. Many options, many possibilities. I walked towards the door. The walls I had built around my emotions still firmly in place. Serena hurried after me, her voice falsely bright. Oh, Eleanor, you must come for dinner soon. I'll make that salmon dish you complimented last year, the one with the capers and dill. You remember, don't you? Her invitation was transparent, a desperate attempt to re-engage me, to solidify a connection she had so carelessly severed, now that I was financially valuable. The salmon dish she spoke of was one I had made for them years ago, a dish she had barely touched, let alone complimented. It was a thinly veiled lie, and it solidified my resolve. That night, back in my quiet apartment, I pulled out my laptop. I wasn't interested in their salmon dinner or their feigned interest. I was interested in real experiences. I opened a travel website, my fingers dancing across the keyboard. A 2-month Mediterranean cruise. First class. I clicked through the options, my heart stirring with a sense of adventure and freedom I hadn't felt in years. Without hesitation, I booked it on the spot. The world, it seemed, was finally open to me. The floodgates, once firmly closed, had now burst open. Arthur's calls, which had dwindled to sporadic, obligatory check-ins, now became a daily occurrence, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. His voice, once laced with indifference, was now filled with an almost desperate eagerness. Serena's texts and invitations were relentless, a barrage of, "We should do lunch. You simply must come over for dinner. We miss you so much." Each message felt less like genuine affection and more like a carefully crafted plea, an attempt to claw back into my good graces, or perhaps my perceived fortune. I ignored most of them, letting the phone ring or leaving texts unread, finding a quiet satisfaction in the reversal of our dynamic. Then, a few days later, my phone rang with a different caller ID. Clara, my granddaughter. My heart gave a little flutter. This wasn't a calculated move. It was genuine. I answered immediately. "Grandma?" Clara's voice was soft, hesitant. I smiled. "What rumors, my dear?" I teased gently, knowing exactly what she meant. She giggled nervously. "Well, Mom and Dad are talking about it constantly. Dad says you're a millionaire, and Mom keeps saying how shocked she is. No offense, Grandma, but you've always seemed like, well, you didn't have very much." Her honesty was refreshing, unfiltered by the pretenses of adulthood. It was a stark contrast to her mother's carefully veiled barbs. I chuckled softly. "None taken, sweetheart. It's true. I have a fair bit tucked away." "Wow," she breathed, a genuine sense of wonder in her voice. "Mom always said you weren't good with money, that you lived paycheck to paycheck. She said that's why you always had the same old car and apartment." The sting of Serena's past comments, even relayed through Clara, was still sharp, but now, it lacked its former power. The truth had disarmed it. "Well, Clara," I began, choosing my words carefully, "your mother was mistaken. For 40 years, I worked hard, very hard. I saved every penny I could. I made sacrifices that many people aren't willing to make. While others spent on luxuries, I invested. While others went on lavish trips, I put my money to work for me. It wasn't always easy, but it was a choice I made, a long-term plan I stuck to. I wanted her to understand the discipline, the quiet resolve that had defined so much of my adult life." Clara was silent for a moment, processing this revelation, absorbing the implications. Then, she spoke, her young voice carrying a surprising weight of insight. "So, you could have afforded nice things all along, but you chose not to. You just lived simply, even though you didn't have to." Her words struck a chord, laying bare a truth I rarely articulated, even to myself. "Yes, Clara," I said, a little catch in my voice. "That's exactly right. But it's a bit more complicated than that." I struggled to explain the subtle pain, the quiet dismissals, the feeling that my own family had made me feel like I didn't belong, that my presence somehow diminished their carefully constructed image. When people around you judge you for your choices, for living a different kind of life, sometimes it's easier to let them think what they want than to constantly prove yourself. It takes less energy to just be. "That's really sad, Grandma," she said, her voice filled with a genuine empathy that touched me deeply. "It can be, sometimes," I admitted, "but it also taught me a lot about resilience and about who truly matters." I then ventured into more direct territory. "Tell me, Clara, what do you make of your parents' sudden change in behavior, their sudden interest in me?" She didn't hesitate. "Honestly, Grandma, it's kind of gross. Like, why do you suddenly become more interesting just because you have money? They weren't like this before." Her candor was a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the performative sincerity of her parents. It confirmed my own cynical suspicions. Then, she said something that truly melted my heart, something I hadn't realized I desperately needed to hear. "I've always thought they treated you badly, Grandma. I just didn't know what to say." A surge of warmth, of profound love, washed over me. This perceptive, honest young woman, my granddaughter, had seen through their charade all along. She had understood the quiet injustice, the subtle cruelty, even when I had tried to shield her from it. In that moment, Clara became my anchor, my validation. She made all the sacrifices, all the years of being misunderstood, feel less lonely. As soon as I hung up with Clara, a renewed sense of purpose surged through me. My 2-month Mediterranean cruise, booked impulsively the other day, now felt less like a simple escape and more like a declaration. It was time to live my life, to explore the world, to fulfill the dreams I had deferred for so long, not out of necessity, but out of a quiet pride in my simple life and a desire not to flaunt what I had. But now, it was different. I was free. Free to enjoy the fruits of my labor, free from their judgment, free to finally disappoint them as much as they had, through their actions and their dismissals, disappointed me. The thought brought a mischievous glint to my eye. My journey was just beginning, and it was going to be magnificent. The relentless calls and texts from Arthur and Serena had become predictable, almost comical. It was clear they were desperate to understand, to categorize, to perhaps even get their hands on the new me. So, I decided to grant them an audience, but on my terms. I called Arthur and, in a calm, measured voice, invited them both to my apartment for coffee. The invitation was a deliberate act, a way to satisfy their curiosity, yes, but also a quiet assertion of my control. I wanted them in my space, on my home turf, where the stark reality of my life, both past and present, would be undeniable. When they arrived, Serena stepped into my living room, and I saw her subtle reaction, her lips pressed together, and her nose almost imperceptibly wrinkled. A tiny, involuntary gesture of distaste at my modest furniture, my worn but comfortable decor. It was the same subtle disdain she'd always displayed, now barely suppressed beneath a thin veneer of politeness. Arthur, on the other hand, wasted no time. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for hidden safes or secret compartments. "Mom," he began, his voice tight with anticipation. "About your investments. How did you do it? What's your strategy?" I smiled, a knowing smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Sit down, both of you. Let me pour you some coffee." Once they were settled, looking distinctly uncomfortable on my unfashionable sofa, I walked over to a small filing cabinet in the corner of my living room. I pulled out a carefully organized folder, its contents crisp and neat. I placed it on the coffee table, sliding it towards them. "All the answers you need are in here." Arthur reached for the folder, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. Inside were meticulously kept bank statements, investment records, and a ledger detailing every transaction, every contribution, dating all the way back to 1985. "My first investment," I explained, my voice calm, "was $50 in a mutual fund. It was a small amount, I know, but it was all I could spare after your father died, and I was left to raise you on my own." "It was a start," Serena scoffed, a familiar sound, though softer now, tinged with disbelief rather than outright mockery. $50? That's barely anything. How could that possibly turn into $3 million? Her eyes, however, were glued to the documents, her skepticism warring with a dawning realization. I pointed to the carefully tabulated columns, the escalating figures. Patience, Serena, consistency, and compound interest. I added to it whenever I could, even small amounts. I chose low-cost index funds and stuck with them through market ups and downs. I read everything I could get my hands on about investing. I lived frugally, always putting a portion of every paycheck into those accounts. Look at the progression. It's all there. Arthur, his brow furrowed in concentration, flipped through the pages. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a growing sense of awe. "Mom?" he breathed, looking up at me. "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were smart, but this? Your financial knowledge is incredible." There was a genuine note of surprise, perhaps even a hint of shame, in his voice. I simply met his gaze. "You never asked, Arthur." The words were soft, yet they carried the weight of years of unspoken truths, of missed opportunities for connection. It was a quiet rebuke, a gentle reminder of his past indifference. Serena, meanwhile, had found a statement showing a balance from 5 years ago. Her eyes flickered to me, wide with shock. "You've been a millionaire for 5 years?" she whispered, the question laced with incredulity. "And you didn't change anything? You still live here? Drive that old Honda?" The idea that someone would possess such wealth and not flaunt it, not upgrade their entire life, was clearly beyond her comprehension. "My goal," I explained, "wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't about status symbols or showing off. It was about freedom, the freedom to live my life on my own terms, without financial worries. The freedom to choose, to be secure, to not be a burden to anyone, ever." I watched their faces. Arthur looked thoughtful, perhaps even a little wistful. Serena, however, seemed utterly bewildered. To them, money was a tool for display, a means to acquire status and envy. The concept of quiet, personal freedom, purchased through decades of discipline, was foreign to them. Then, I delivered my next piece of news. "In fact," I said, a faint smile touching my lips, "I've already put some of that freedom into action. I'm going on a trip, a 2-month Mediterranean cruise. I leave in 5 weeks." Arthur practically choked on his coffee. 2 months? By yourself? His voice was filled with a mixture of shock and concern, though I suspected the concern was more about my lack of a chaperone than my well-being. Serena, however, was immediately alarmed. "A woman your age, traveling alone for 2 months? Eleanor, that's not safe. Who will look after you? What if something happens?" Her voice rose, tinged with a controlling edge, as if my choices required her approval. I simply shook my head, my smile widening. "I assure you, Serena, I am perfectly capable of looking after myself. I've been doing it for decades. And I'm looking forward to every moment of it." I stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some packing to do." I left them sitting there, amidst the scattered financial records and the aroma of stale coffee, clearly confused and struggling to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the independent, financially secure Eleanor who was now standing before them. Their attempts to control or understand me felt distant, irrelevant. My new life, the one I had quietly built for myself, was finally taking shape. And I was ready for it. The weeks leading up to my cruise were a whirlwind of last-minute preparations and, predictably, escalating desperation from Arthur and Serena. His calls became more frequent, his tone increasingly urgent. Serena, emboldened by his perceived lack of success in swaying me, even resorted to unannounced visits, knocking on my door with elaborate excuses about just being in the neighborhood or dropping off some homemade cookies. Each interaction was a transparent attempt to re-establish a connection that they had so carelessly severed, now driven by a clear agenda. Then, 3 weeks before my departure, Serena arrived with a flourish, clutching a brightly colored invitation. It was for Clara's high school graduation party. Her smile was stretched, almost painful, across her face. "Eleanor," she gushed, holding out the card. "Clara specifically asked for you to be there. She would be absolutely devastated if her favorite grandma wasn't there to celebrate her big day." The words were coated in saccharin, but her eyes held a desperate glint. I took the invitation, my fingers tracing the embossed lettering. "That's lovely, Serena," I said, my voice calm, but with an underlying edge. "However, I recall Clara graduating from middle school last year, and Leo from high school the year before that. I wasn't invited to either of those celebrations. What makes this graduation different?" Serena visibly flustered, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. She stammered, searching for an excuse. "Oh, well, those were smaller, more intimate gatherings, you know, just immediate family. This one is, well, this is a big one. And Clara is older now. She really understands the importance of having everyone there." Her excuses were flimsy, transparent attempts to reframe the past, to whitewash years of deliberate exclusion. I simply shook my head. "Just stop lying, Serena," I said, my voice sharpening, cutting through her performative sincerity. We both know exactly what's been happening here for 8 years. From the moment you walked into my life, you judged me. You judged my home, my job, my choices. You systematically chipped away at my relationship with Arthur, making him choose between his humble mother and his glamorous new family. You made me feel like an embarrassment, someone to be hidden away. Her eyes welled up, and she dabbed at them with a pristine white tissue she pulled from her sleeve. "That's not fair, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've always just wanted what's best for Arthur. And for you to be happy." The tears flowed freely now, but I found myself unmoved. Were they tears of genuine remorse, or tears of frustration that her carefully woven facade was unraveling? "Is that so, Serena?" I challenged, my gaze unwavering. "Then tell me, if Arthur had never found out about my savings, about my investments, would you still be sitting here, shedding tears and begging me to come to Clara's party? Or would you still be forgetting to invite me, making veiled comments about my practical life?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Is Arthur's sudden affection for me real, or is it driven by the $3 million you now know I have?" Serena recoiled, speechless, her tears momentarily forgotten. The truth of my words hit her with the force of a physical blow. That evening, as I was preparing a light dinner, Arthur called. His voice was laced with a familiar hesitancy. "Mom, Serena tells me you're upset about the party." "Upset, Arthur?" I scoffed softly. "That's an understatement." "No, Arthur. Everything is not okay." "But Mom," he protested, "Serena is really trying now. She's trying to make things right. You're being unfair." His words stung, a familiar pattern of deflection and blame. My patience, worn thin by years of this dance, finally snapped. "Unfair, Arthur? Let me ask you this then. If you'd never found out about my savings, about my net worth, would we be having this conversation right now? Would you be defending Serena's efforts to make things right?" I didn't wait for his answer, knowing full well what it would be. "When your father died, Arthur, you were just a boy. You held my hand, and you looked me in the eye and you promised me, with tears in your eyes, that we'd always take care of each other, that we'd always be there for each other. Do you remember that promise, Arthur?" Silence. A long, heavy silence stretched between us, filled with the ghosts of forgotten promises and neglected bonds. "I need you to think about that, Arthur," I continued, my voice firm, resolute. "I need you to decide what kind of relationship you want with me going forward, because I'm no longer willing to settle for scraps of attention or for being treated as an inconvenience. You need to decide who I am to you and what place you want me to have in your life, and you need to be honest with yourself about why." Arthur was left speechless, the weight of my words clearly pressing down on him. "Mom, I need to think." He finally managed to stammer, his voice barely a whisper. "Do that, Arthur," I said, my voice softer now, but no less resolved. "Think long and hard." I hung up the phone, the conversation a watershed moment. The ball was now in his court, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I had finally spoken my truth. 3 days later, the phone rang, and it was Clara. Her voice was urgent, a mix of excitement and distress. "Grandma, you won't believe it. Mom and Dad are in a huge fight about you coming to my graduation party. Mom says you can't come. She's worried about her parents knowing about your money, saying it'll change how they see our family, like we're not as wealthy as they thought." The sheer absurdity of Serena's concern struck me. Her entire world, it seemed, revolved around maintaining a facade of superiority. But Clara's next words cut through the absurdity, touching my heart. "I told her that's ridiculous. You're my grandmother. I want you at my party. Please, Grandma, will you come?" Her sincerity was a beacon in the murky waters of family politics. That evening, Arthur called again. His voice, usually so controlled, was softer, laced with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. "Mom," he began, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. "You were right. You were right about everything. I let Serena's behavior happen. I should have stood up for you, for us, a long time ago. The admission, so long overdue, was a significant step. He paused, then added, his voice firmer. Serena will have to adjust. If she can't, that's her problem, not yours. A glimmer of hope, faint but real, sparked within me. Thank you, Arthur, I said, my voice steady. That means a lot. I agreed to come to Clara's party, but not without a clear warning. Understand this, Arthur. This is your last chance to get this right. For Clara, and for what's left of our relationship. The day of the graduation party arrived. I dressed in a simple but elegant dress, one I'd bought for myself, not for their approval. As I walked into Arthur and Serena's sprawling backyard, filled with guests and celebratory chatter, I could feel eyes on me. Whispers followed in my wake, a curious buzz that confirmed my story had indeed spread. Serena, spotting me, rushed over, a forced smile plastered on her face. She led me over to her parents, both impeccably dressed and radiating an air of refined affluence. Mother, father, she chirped. This is Eleanor, Arthur's mother. She used to work in facility management. Her attempt to whitewash my career, to elevate it to something more palatable for her discerning parents, was painfully obvious. I met her parents' gaze directly, offering a polite nod. Then, I turned to Serena, a small, knowing smile on my lips. Actually, Serena, I corrected gently but firmly. I was a custodian at the local high school for 30 years. I took great pride in keeping the school clean and safe for the students and teachers. Serena's face flushed a deep crimson, and her parents exchanged a swift, uncomfortable glance. The truth, in its simplicity, was a powerful weapon. Throughout the evening, Clara's friends, unburdened by adult pretenses, approached me with wide-eyed curiosity. Are you really super rich? One asked candidly. That's so cool, another exclaimed. Their youthful honesty was refreshing, a stark contrast to the calculating glances from some of the older guests. Serena, clearly mortified by my bluntness and the children's questions, tried repeatedly to pull me aside. Eleanor, she hissed at one point, tugging at my arm. You're making a scene. My social circle. My reputation. I pulled my arm away gently, my gaze unwavering. Even now, Serena, I stated, my voice low but firm. You're still ashamed of who I am. Nothing has truly changed for you, has it? Arthur, witnessing the exchange, finally stepped in, attempting damage control. Mom worked in education for 30 years. He tried, echoing Serena's earlier attempt to reframe my career. I turned to him, my eyes holding a profound sadness. No, Arthur. I was a janitor. It was honest work, and I was good at it. You should never be ashamed of honest work. I looked around at the guests, many of whom were now openly listening. Love without respect, Arthur, isn't enough anymore. Not for me. Later, as the party began to wind down, Clara approached me, her eyes thoughtful. Grandma, she asked, her voice quiet but clear. When you come back from your cruise, are you coming back to the same life? Or are you going to do something different? It was a profound question, one that echoed my own recent reflections. I put my arm around her, giving her a gentle squeeze. I'm coming back, my dear, to my home, to my friends, to my quiet life. But I'm going to live more fully, embrace new experiences, and spend my time with people who truly value me for who I am, not for what they think I have. I found Arthur standing alone by the patio door, watching the remaining guests. I walked over to him, my heart a mix of love and unresolved sorrow. Arthur, I said, his name a soft whisper. I love you. You're my son, but if you want to be part of this new chapter in my life, if you want to rebuild what we once had, you'll have to earn that privilege. It won't be given freely anymore. He looked at me, a silent understanding passing between us. A raw admission of regret in his eyes. Days later, I boarded my cruise ship, the vast expanse of the ocean stretching out before me. As the ship pulled away from the dock, a profound sense of freedom washed over me. I was no longer Arthur's mother, or Serena's aunt, or even the janitor. I was just Eleanor, on the ship, surrounded by new faces, sharing meals and laughter. I found a peace and acceptance I hadn't realized I craved. I made new friends, people who knew nothing of my past, who simply enjoyed my company. It was then that I truly understood. My worth didn't need my family's approval. It was always there, woven into the fabric of my quiet, resilient soul. And now, finally, I was ready to live it.